For 14 years, no name had ever been written beneath the problem taped to the wall of genius outside room 214. In about 3 minutes, that was going to change forever, and the man who had hung that problem there as a trophy of his own untouchable brilliance was about to watch it happen in front of 312 people. To understand why a piece of chalk squeaking against a portable whiteboard would end a SUV 30-year teaching career, you have to go back 6 weeks to a cracked composition notebook sitting on a kitchen table in a 2-bedroom apartment on the south side of Drayton, Georgia. Marcus Webb was 12 years old, and he had been doing math in that notebook since he was 7, long before anyone outside his apartment knew he could. The notebook had belonged to his father, Curtis Webb, who had bought it second-hand from a yard sale for 50 cents the year he enrolled in night classes at the community college, hoping to become an electrical engineer. Curtis never finished. He was killed in a warehouse accident when Marcus was 5, 2 semesters short of his associate's degree, and the notebook came home from his locker in a manila envelope along with his work boots and $41 in cash that had been in his pocket. Marcus's grandmother, Odessa Webb, kept the notebook on the kitchen shelf for 2 years before Marcus found it on his own, flipping through pages of his father's careful handwriting, algebra problems half-finished in pencil, a few doodled diagrams of circuits, and on the very last used page, a single sentence written in the margin that Marcus had read so many times he could recite it without looking. Numbers don't care who your daddy is or what's in your bank account. They're the only thing in this world that's ever been completely fair to me. Marcus took that sentence the way some children take scripture. He started solving the unfinished problems in the notebooks, blank pages, using a library book on algebra. He'd checked out so many times, the librarian eventually just let him keep it. By age 9, he had taught himself geometry from a stack of donated textbooks the church gave, in a way, every spring. By 11, working through library copies of calculus textbooks during the 2 hours each afternoon, he waited at the public library for his grandmother to finish her shift at the laundromat 3 blocks away. He had taught himself enough that his 6th-grade math teacher, stunned, had quietly recommended him for a scholarship seat at Drayton Preparatory Academy, the most respected school in the county, the kind of place where tuition ran $14,000 a year, and most students arrived in cars that cost more than Odessa Webb made in 3 years combined. Odessa was 66 years old. She had raised Marcus alone since Curtis died, on a fixed income that came mostly from her late husband's small pension and whatever she could still earn folding other people's laundry 4 days a week, work that had started giving her arthritis so badly in both hands that she had begun skipping her own blood pressure medication some months just to make rent, which sat at $540 a month for the apartment they shared on Lindbergh Street. When the scholarship letter arrived for Marcus, covering 80% of tuition, but still leaving a remaining balance of $2,800 a year, plus $60 in mandatory fees for uniforms, books, and the academic enrichment programs every student was expected to join, Odessa sat at the kitchen table for a long time, doing the math herself in the margins of an electric bill, before she finally said, "We'll find it, however we have to." She took on a 5th shift at the laundromat. She sold her late husband's pocket watch, the one thing of real value she owned, for $310 to a pawn shop 2 towns over, rather than sell it locally where someone might recognize it. She told Marcus none of this. She simply packed his lunch each morning in the same scratched lunchbox he'd carried since 3rd grade, and told him, every single day, without exception, you go in that building and you remember whose grandson you are. Drayton Preparatory Academy's math department was run, almost entirely, by one man, Dr. Elliot Crane, who had taught calculus and advanced mathematics there for 22 years and was, without question, the most decorated faculty member on staff. He had co-written a supplementary textbook used in 3 states. He ran the school's nationally ranked mathletes team, which had placed in the top 5 at the state championship 11 times under his direction. He had been named County Educator of the Year twice, and a framed photo of him receiving the 2nd award hung just outside the principal's office, a fact Dr. Crane mentioned, in one form or another, in nearly every class he taught. What very few people outside Dr. Crane, own history knew was that 26 years earlier, as a doctoral candidate at a respected research university, Elliot Crane had spent 4 years working on a single unsolved problem in number theory for his dissertation, the kind of problem that, if cracked, could have launched an academic career far beyond teaching high school calculus in rural Georgia. He never solved it. His advisor eventually moved him onto a more modest, more achievable thesis topic instead, and Crane finished his doctorate, took the only teaching position offered to him, and spent the next 2 decades building a reputation as untouchable in every room smaller than the one that had once quietly told him he was not quite good enough. He had typed the original unsolved problem from his abandoned dissertation onto a single, laminated sheet of paper 14 years earlier and pinned it to a bulletin board outside room 214 that the school had nicknamed, half-jokingly and then permanently, the Wall of Genius. Dr. Crane told every incoming class the same story, that the problem had stumped graduate mathematicians and university faculty for years, that he personally offered a standing $5,000 prize, funded out of his own pocket, to any student who could solve it completely, and that in 14 years, not one student, not the valedictorians, not the National Merit Scholars, not the 2 former students who had gone on to MIT, had ever managed to write a correct solution beneath it. He did not mention, to any of those classes, that the problem was not actually his own creation, the way he always implied, and that he had quietly stopped believing, somewhere around year 6, that anyone at Drayton Prep, including himself, would ever solve it. The Wall of Genius had stopped being a challenge and become, instead, a kind of permanent proof that Elliot Crane's failure was simply too sophisticated for ordinary minds to overcome. Proof, in other words, that he had never really failed at all. Marcus Webb walked into Dr. Crane's advanced mathematics class on his very first day at Drayton Prep wearing a uniform, blazer 1 size too large, purchased secondhand from the school's donation closet, and carrying his father's cracked composition notebook tucked inside his backpack instead of the leather portfolio most of his classmates carried. Dr. Crane noticed him immediately, the way he noticed every scholarship student, with a quick, practiced glance that cataloged the second-hand blazer, the off-brand sneakers, and the zip code listed on the enrollment roster, and filed Marcus away, before a single equation had been written on the board, into the category of students Dr. Crane had long ago decided did not belong in his advanced section. For 6 weeks, Marcus sat in the 3rd row and said, almost nothing, the way children learn to say almost nothing in rooms where they sense, correctly, that speaking up might cost them more than staying quiet ever would. He turned in every homework assignment early, scored perfectly on every quiz, and never once raised his hand to correct Dr. Crane, even on the 2 occasions when Dr. Crane made a small computational error on the board that Marcus, working it silently in the margin of his father's notebook, caught within seconds. Dr. Crane noticed the perfect quiz scores, and instead of curiosity, what stirred in him was something closer to suspicion. 6 weeks into the term, he kept Marcus after class and asked him, not unkindly on the surface, but with an edge underneath every word, whether he had perhaps received extra help at home with his assignments, a question he had never once asked any of the school's wealthier students who turned in equally clean homework. No, sir, Marcus said quietly. I just like math. Everyone likes math until it gets hard, Dr. Marcus, Crane said, almost to himself. And Marcus understood, without needing the sentence explained any further, exactly what kind of test he had just failed in a teacher's mind, without ever being told the rules. It was the annual all-school assembly, held in the auditorium on the first Friday of November, that brought everything to a head. The assembly that year was themed around academic excellence, meant to showcase the school's top achievements to parents and the district superintendent, who attended every year specifically to highlight Drayton Prep's results to the school board. 312 people filled the auditorium that morning: students, faculty, parents, and the superintendent's office staff, along with a local newspaper reporter assigned to cover the district's Excellence in Education feature. Dr. Crane had been asked to present the Wall of Genius problem as part of the program, a tradition he relished every year, walking on stage to remind the entire school, the parents, and the visiting superintendent that in 14 years, his standing $5,000 challenge had never once been claimed. He had not planned to call Marcus up that morning, but during the program, scanning the front rows for a volunteer to demonstrate the kind of effort it takes to even attempt the problem, his eyes landed on Marcus sitting quietly near the aisle, and something small and cruel sparked in him, the same instinct that had filed Marcus away on day one. "Mr. Webb," he said into the microphone, smiling in a way that did not reach his eyes, "why don't you come up and give it a shot? Show everyone what kind of dedication it takes to even attempt a problem like this." A ripple of laughter moved through a cluster of students near the front, who understood exactly what kind of joke their teacher was making, even if the rest of the auditorium did not. Marcus stood up slowly. He walked down the aisle, past rows of parents and students, climbed the 3 steps to the stage, and stood in front of a portable whiteboard that had been wheeled out specifically for the demonstration. The same laminated problem from the wall of genius now projected onto a screen above his head for the entire auditorium to see. Dr. Crane handed him a marker with a flourish, glancing toward the superintendent's row with a small, satisfied smile, the kind of smile a man wears when he believes he already knows exactly how a moment is going to end. "Take your time," he said, his voice carrying easily through the auditorium's sound system. "Nobody expects you to actually finish it." Marcus looked at the problem on the screen for a long moment. Then he looked down at his backpack, still slung over one shoulder, where the corner of his father's cracked composition notebook was just barely visible through the unzipped top pocket. He thought about his grandmother's hands, swollen and aching every night from 4 years of extra laundromat shifts. He thought about a sentence written in pencil in a dead man's handwriting that said numbers had never once cared who anybody's daddy was. He uncapped the marker and began to write. The first 2 lines he wrote were standard, the kind of opening moves any advanced student might attempt, and a few students near the front exchanged smirks, assuming this was exactly the kind of public failure their teacher had set up for everyone's amusement. Dr. Crane folded his arms and watched with the relaxed posture of a man waiting out a clock he was certain would run down to nothing, but Marcus kept writing. His 3rd line broke from the standard approach entirely, introducing a substitution method he had taught himself working through a borrowed university textbook on number theory the previous summer, a method most high school students, and a fair number of college students, had never even been exposed to. Dr. Crane's relaxed posture shifted slightly. He uncrossed his arms. By the 6th line, the auditorium had gone quiet in a way it had not been quiet all morning. 312 people watching a 12-year-old boy in a second-hand blazer fill a whiteboard with handwriting that moved faster and more confidently with every line. Dr. Crane stepped closer to the board, his earlier smile completely gone now, replaced by something tighter, something that did not yet want to admit what it was watching. Marcus finished the final line 9 minutes after he had begun, capped the marker, and stepped back from the board. For 3 full seconds, nobody in the auditorium said a single word. Dr. Crane stared at the board, his eyes moving line by line through a proof structure he had spent 4 years of his own graduate career failing to construct, written now in 9 minutes by a 12-year-old he had called up to the stage as a joke. His face had gone the color of the whiteboard itself. Then a voice broke the silence. Not Dr. Crane's, but the superintendent's, sitting in the front row beside a visiting university mathematics professor who had been invited that morning specifically to help judge the school's academic showcase. The professor, a woman named Dr. Renata Solis from the State University 2 hours away, had risen halfway out of her seat without realizing it, her eyes locked on the final lines of Marcus's proof. "That's correct," Dr. Renata Solis said, loud enough for the whole auditorium to hear, her voice carrying genuine astonishment. "That substitution in line 3, I haven't seen that approach used outside of 2 published papers, and neither of those was written by anyone younger than 30. This is a complete, valid proof." The auditorium broke open all at once, 312 people erupting into a wave of applause and stunned murmuring that took nearly a full minute to settle. Marcus stood very still at the front of the stage, his hands at his sides, not smiling yet, simply absorbing a sound he had never once expected to hear, directed at himself in a room like that one. Dr. Crane did not applaud. He stood frozen beside the whiteboard, the laminated problem still glowing on the screen above his head. 14 years of carefully maintained mythology collapsing in front of the one audience. The district superintendent, a visiting university professor, 312 witnesses, and a newspaper reporter with a notebook already filling with quotes that he at least wanted watching it happen. "I'd like to verify the proof formally, Dr. Solis said, walking up onto the stage herself now, but on first read, this appears to be not only correct, but more elegant than the original approach I'm familiar with from the literature." She turned to Dr. Crane. "You said this problem had gone unsolved for 14 years. May I ask where it originated?" Dr. Crane's mouth opened. For a long moment, nothing came out at all. "It was a research problem," he finally said, his voice tight. "From my own doctoral work. Your own unfinished dissertation problem," Dr. Solis said slowly, "putting the pieces together in real time in front of the entire auditorium, which you've been presenting to high school students for 14 years as an open challenge. With a standing cash prize you apparently never expected anyone to actually claim." The murmuring in the auditorium shifted into something sharper now, parents leaning toward each other, the newspaper reporter writing faster, the superintendent, a measured woman named Dr. Patricia Yu, who had sat through 11 years of Dr. Crane's Wall of Genius presentations without ever once questioning their framing, stood up from her seat in the front row. "Dr. Crane," she said, her voice calm but carrying clearly, "I'd like to see the formal records of this prize, including its funding source and the criteria for awarding it, in my office on Monday morning." Dr. Crane did not respond to her directly. He stood at the front of the stage, beside a 12-year-old who had just dismantled, in 9 minutes, the single piece of mythology he had spent 14 years building his entire professional identity around, and he simply could not finish a sentence that explained any of it. The applause had not even fully died down before Marcus's grandmother, who had been standing quietly at the very back of the auditorium after slipping in late from her morning shift, specifically because Marcus had texted her that he had a school thing that morning without explaining further, made her way down the side aisle, her work uniform still on, her hands still slightly swollen from the laundromat's industrial machines. She did not say anything dramatic. She simply walked up to the edge of the stage, and when Marcus saw her, he climbed down the 3 steps and walked straight into her arms in front of the entire auditorium. 312 people, watching a boy who had just solved an unsolvable problem become, for one long moment, simply a child holding on to his grandmother. "I told you," Odessa whispered into his hair, her voice thick. "I told you to remember whose grandson you are." "I remembered, Mama Des," Marcus said quietly. "I remembered the whole time." Dr. Crane was placed on administrative leave by the following Monday afternoon, pending a formal review by the district into his Wall of Genius prize, which an audit quickly revealed had never actually been backed by any escrowed funds at all. The $5,000 offer, repeated to 14 years of students as an honest standing challenge, had existed only as a verbal claim, never deposited, never insured, never intended, in Dr. Crane's own private accounting, to actually be paid out to anyone. Dr. Patricia Yu, the superintendent, did not fire Dr. Crane outright. Instead, the district required him to personally fund the $5,000 prize from his own savings within 30 days, present it to Marcus and his grandmother in a formal letter of correction distributed to every family in the district, and step down immediately from his role overseeing the Mathletes program, a position handed instead to Dr. Renata Solis, who agreed to serve as a part-time visiting advisor to the team once a month, specifically requesting that the program's recruitment process be restructured to include direct outreach into the district's lower-income middle schools, the same kind of outreach that had nearly missed Marcus Webb entirely if his 6th-grade teacher had not pushed hard enough on his behalf. Dr. Crane delivered the $5,000 check to Marcus and Odessa 3 weeks later, in a quiet meeting in the principal's office, rather than in front of the auditorium that had witnessed his unraveling. He did not look at Marcus directly when he handed it over. He said only, stiffly, "Congratulations on a correct proof," and left the room before either of them could respond. Marcus did not need him to say anything more than that. He had already gotten what mattered most from that morning. Standing on a stage with 312 witnesses and a $5,000 check could never have been the real prize anyway. Odessa used $2,800 of the prize money to pay off the remaining tuition balance for Marcus's full 4 years at Drayton Prep in a single lump payment, freeing up the laundromat shifts she had been working purely to cover the gap. She used another $310 to buy back her late husband's pocket watch from the pawn shop 2 towns over. The manager, remembering her clearly enough to waive the storage fee once he heard, through the small-town grapevine, exactly why she was finally able to come back for it. The remainder she put into a savings account for Marcus, untouched, the same way Curtis Webb's wages had once sat untouched in a manila envelope, waiting for a future neither of them had been sure would come. The newspaper story ran the following week, under the headline, "Drayton Prep Student, 12/1, Solves Teacher's 14-Year Unsolvable Problem," and within a month, the story had been picked up by 2 regional television stations and shared widely enough that Marcus began receiving letters from middle schoolers across the state, some of them asking for math advice, several of them simply writing to say that watching the video clip from the assembly had made them feel, for the first time, like being smart and being poor were not 2 things that had to cancel each other out. Dr. Renata Solis, true to her word, spent the following spring building a new outreach pipeline between the university's mathematics department and 6 lower-income middle schools in the district, a program that, by the end of its first full year, had identified and enrolled 41 students into advanced math tracks who had never previously been recommended for gifted testing by their home schools. 3 of those 41 students came from Lindbergh Street, the same street where Marcus and Odessa had lived for 8 years. Marcus kept his father's cracked composition notebook in his backpack every single day for the rest of middle school, the same way he always had, though by the following spring, he had finally started a second notebook of his own, the original simply too full of both his father's unfinished work and his own finished proofs to hold anything more. It was on a warm evening the following May, almost exactly 6 months after the assembly, that Odessa found Marcus sitting at their kitchen table, working through a problem in his new notebook, the pocket watch she had bought back sitting on the table beside him, ticking quietly the way it had ticked in her husband's pocket for 30 years before that. "You ever gonna stop carrying that old notebook of your daddy's around everywhere?" she asked, setting a plate of food down beside him. Marcus looked up, considering the question seriously, the way he considered most things now. "No, ma'am," he said. "I figure I owe him knowing I finished something he started, even if he never got to see it." Odessa sat down across from him, her swollen hands finally resting easier now that 4 extra shifts a week had become 2 again, and she did not say anything for a long moment, simply watching her grandson work through a proof that, 6 months earlier, an entire room full of grown men and women would not have believed a boy from Lindbergh Street was capable of solving. A child does not need a teacher's permission to be brilliant. He only needs 1 quiet room, 1 borrowed book, and 1 person at home who never once let him forget whose grandson he was.